Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. J, and I would like to talk to you about virtual team building. So, there's a couple topics I would like to cover. The first is Zoom tech and some tips on how to make your Zoom client work better for you. And then we'll move on to communication over Zoom and discuss some of the differences in our virtual environment as compared to the way we're used to communicating in person. And then finally, I'd like to discuss breakout rooms and propose some solutions to make breakout rooms work better for you and for your groups. Let's dig into Zoom tech and explore some tips and tricks to make your Zoom client work better for you. Now, the first stop is the client itself. You can log into Zoom via your web browser or on a tablet or a smartphone, but the undeniably superior option is going to be the Zoom desktop client. There's a variety of features and options that are available only via the desktop client, but two of the biggest ones are better background noise reduction algorithms and better screen sharing tools. The choice is obvious for instructors, but even students can benefit by using the Zoom desktop client instead of any other version of Zoom. I'd like to encourage everyone to add a profile picture to their Zoom profile. This helps me put names to faces when you're off camera, and hopefully that means that we'll be able to recognize each other when we get back together for in-person classes. It's pretty easy to do so. You just need to log into your online account at psu.zoom.us and then add a profile picture from there. Don't forget about the chat. In fact, the chat is the best way to ask questions, especially during a long lecture. That allows me to address your questions in line as the topics come up naturally, or when there's a natural break in my flow, I can read through the questions and address them all together. There's a variety of keyboard shortcuts in Zoom, and I put a link in the description so you can explore the other options. But I'd like to talk about a couple key ones that'll help make your Zoom experience a little more seamless. The first one is just your space bar. Space bar is essentially push to talk when you're muted. And so this way you don't actually have to totally unmute your microphone when all you want to do is quickly chime in with an answer to a question or a response to some sort of prompt. Now, you can take that a step further and toggle your microphone on and off. For Windows users, that keyboard shortcut is simply Alt A. For Mac users, it's going to be Command Shift A, and that toggles your microphone all the way on or all the way off. And that's more useful in a group setting. Similarly, for your video, Windows users have a shortcut Alt V. For Mac users, it's again Command Shift V, and that's going to toggle your video all the way on or all the way off. So you can see my profile picture now, and I'll bring my video back with Alt V again. The last keyboard shortcut that I think is particularly useful is Alt Y. And what Alt Y is going to do is raise your hand. This is great in class because it allows me to quickly ask simple questions just to check in, say, do we need to go over this topic again? Or who all has finished their homework already? And that way I don't have to set up poll questions in advance for every question I want to ask the class. It's also helpful because it sorts users that have raised their hand to the top of the list in both the user panel, but also in the gallery view, so I can quickly assess who is responding to the question. Let's take a look at some of the options we can set for ourselves for keyboard shortcuts. To get there, let's go to the settings. Click your up arrow next to your microphone, the bottom left corner, and select audio settings. That's not going to get us all the way there. So follow the left sidebar to the second to last entry and select keyboard shortcuts. Okay, now that we're looking at our keyboard shortcuts, you can see that Zoom provides you a full list of the available shortcuts. So I do suggest that you dig through this and find the shortcuts that might be useful to you. You can also change any of these shortcuts For example, here, I'll change this to Alt C and it will warn you when that shortcut is already in use. So let me change that back to the way it was. The last thing I want to point out in this settings menu is the enable global shortcut checkbox. And this allows each of these shortcuts to be active even when screen doesn't have the screen focus. Moving on to audio. And again, there's a link in the description with more advice on how to improve your audio setup, but I'll cover the basics right now. First off, headsets are almost always going to be the preferred option, like the one I'm wearing right now. You don't have to spring for an expensive headset. Bluetooth headsets are perfectly acceptable. And while they might reduce your naturalness to a certain extent, they're very good for vocal intelligibility. And that's the main thing that we need over Zoom. All headsets are going to provide you better noise cancellation than the internal microphones for your laptop, especially when you're typing. And also, headsets aren't dependent upon the location of your head or the orientation of your head. So if I look away or reach for something off screen, you'll still be able to hear me pretty well. On the topic of background noise cancellation, you should set yours for your specific environment. So let's go ahead and take a look at those settings and see what we can do to tailor that for us individually. So again, go to the microphone, the bottom left corner of your screen, hit the up arrow and select the last option in that context menu to go to your audio settings. Okay, now that we're looking at our audio settings, I want to focus on one element in particular, and that's suppress background noise. Now, typically, it's just going to be set to auto, and that's for most people what you want. Rarely would you use low. I usually have mine set to medium. Now, the last setting, high, is particularly relevant for certain users. For example, my mother, who has 3 toy dogs that bark at every car that passes her house. I wish I could convince her to use high background noise suppression so I didn't have to listen to her dogs bark all the time. That said, one thing to keep in mind if you're going to use high background noise suppression, and you should if you're in the environment that requires it, but if you do, it's going to delay your vocal pickup. So bear in mind that you may lose the first word of your sentences when you start speaking. So this is an example of a time that I actually intentionally use connector words like just to get Zoom to pick up my vocals before I start speaking so that the important words aren't lost to my teammates. One of the idiosyncrasies of Zoom audio is that it doesn't give you any feedback or side tone to let you know how you sound to others. Oftentimes, this means that you'll be making noise into your microphone and you won't even realize this. I ran afoul of this at my first big dance event I was DJing for on Zoom. I got about 3 songs into my set and I knew the song really well. In fact, I knew all the words and I sang them loudly into my microphone for the entire song. I had no idea, and I was not trying to sing well. The chat comments were fun afterwards because they were debating whether or not they should tell me or enjoy the mess I was making. Anyways, there's a variety of solutions you can use to improve your audio quality if you have connectivity issues. The first stop should always be just turning off your video. Your video uses roughly an order of magnitude more bandwidth than your audio does. So for a weak connection, usually turning off your video is enough to clean up your audio until your connection restabilizes. Now, if you have a consistently bad connection, a good option is to dial in with your phone. You can actually merge your phone and your video from your computer once they're both in the Zoom meeting and get a fairly seamless Zoom experience that way, but your audio will be handled by your phone, so you'll get the same audio quality you would get during a phone call. Moving on to video, there's a variety of solutions you can use to improve your video, and in fact, I put another link in the description below, so check that out if you need more advice. But let's start by looking at the video settings. So again, go to the bottom left corner of your screen, but this time click the up arrow next to your camera. The bottom of that context menu, select video settings. Now that we're on our video settings, I'd like to point out my favorite video setting, which is touch up my appearance. So I'll lean in and you can see that when I check this box, it's going to basically put digital foundation on. That's nice. Let's crank that up and see how that looks. Oof, my friends know I'm not that pretty. Let's tone that back down a bit. So you can see that this will smooth out your complexion and your appearance and help give you confidence on Zoom, even if you just rolled out of bed for class. This brings me to virtual backgrounds. And as you can see, I'm a fan overall. Now, if you have bandwidth problems, stay away from virtual backgrounds. It's not going to do you any favors at all. If you want to use a virtual background, and I do recommend it because it's nice, it helps clear out all the clutter behind me so that it's not distracting in class. And then I don't have to clean up the house every time I join a meeting. Some tips on how to make virtual backgrounds work better for you. What you need is a uniform and high contrast background behind you. Blank white drywall usually works pretty well as long as you're not wearing a white shirt that matches that drywall. For me, I have a problem because I have a high back chair that's black and my dark beard tends to blend in with it and make my face wiggly on Zoom. That's not so great for class. So let me turn off my virtual background so we can take a look at my setup and consider what I'm addressing in my own apartment to make this work for me. There we go. There's my green screen. And also you'll notice a green slip cover for my chair because otherwise you can see that my beard matches the chair probably a little bit too well. Okay, so if we take that green screen out of the way, then we can talk about lighting. Now, lighting is an important concern on Zoom. And what you want to try to do is put all of your light sources above and behind your camera so you're front lighting your face. What you want to avoid is having light sources on screen. For example, those light sources will wash out my face, glare out my camera, and make it very difficult to see me on Zoom. Even worse, windows, like the big window behind my parrot's fortress of filth. Windows bringing in daylight in the middle of the day can actually be substantially brighter even than these direct view on-screen light sources inside the house. So take care not to point your camera directly into a light source or directly into a window, which is effectively a light source during the day. Communicating on Zoom. There are some important differences that we should consider so that we can be good teammates and good friends to people in our virtual environment. One of the biggest ones is Zoom itself. Zoom uses what's called asynchronous audio, which means the audio focus is only going to be on roughly 1.5 speakers at a time. Now, the primary speaker, whose vocals are actually being amplified by Zoom, will have a gold box around their video. A secondary speaker will just have a gold bar beneath their video. Their vocals aren't being amplified, but you can still usually hear them. If you don't have a gold box or a gold bar, your vocals are being decreased and your team may not be able to hear you at all. So it's worthwhile to pay attention to where the audio focus is, both because it tells you who you're listening to and also because it tells you whether or not you're being listened to. Pause length is another important thing to consider on Zoom, especially because of lag. And that lag increases greatly if you're talking to someone on a different continent, for example. So I try to ensure that I use longer pauses, and I'm a person who uses very short pause lengths in conversation typically. But if you don't have longer pauses from time to time, it can be very difficult to get a word in edgewise without talking over you. So consider increasing your pause length to be a better conversationalist. Positivity bias. This one I cannot stress enough. Don't forget your basic social niceties. Say hello to people as they join your group meetings. Wave or just send them a quick chat. It goes a long way. We're all missing a lot of our social connection right now, and we can restore some of that just by being kind in Zoom. Check ins are a great way to start meetings. I'm not talking about sharing your life story, just a quick few minutes of how you're doing and how you're feeling at the moment so that your teammates know how to work with you better. We should also keep in mind that there are fewer social cues in Zoom than there are in person. It's harder to read facial cues, and tone cues can often get lost, especially when you have dropouts in your audio. That leads to more misinterpretations of your intent and your meaning. So try to bias what you're saying in a very positive manner because oftentimes neutral or negative neutral statements can be interpreted as highly negative. And when your teammates leave the group meeting, oftentimes that means they're leaving and going into an empty room by themselves where negative words can echo around in their head until the next time you see them. So it's an important thing to keep in mind when you're communicating, especially towards the end of your meetings. And I'm not immune from this either. I'm still not talking to a close friend of mine over a disagreement we had at New Year's. And it was a silly disagreement. We honestly just ran out of time to get done what we wanted to do together. But nonetheless, I haven't talked to her in 3 weeks. So try to always lean towards a positivity bias. Sign language has become a powerful new tool. So oftentimes you don't have the ability to talk. Someone else is dominating the audio channel, or you just want to give a quick response to what they're saying. You still have a visual only communication channel, and we can fill that channel with sign language. So I'd like to teach a couple basic signs. Full disclaimer, I am not a competent signer. I'm learning. I have a good friend, Antonietta Alfano from Rochester, New York, which is also one of the biggest deaf communities in the world. And she has brought ASL to several of my communities and really has enhanced the way we communicate on Zoom. Couple simple signs. Let's start with yes and no. Yes. So raise your dominant hand and make a fist. And then all you need to do is knock. So that's yes. And if you forget this sign, then thumbs up works pretty well. Nodding your head emphatically also works pretty well. Sign for no is fairly straightforward as well. We just have two fingers on top and our thumb on the bottom, and we'll bring them together. So I'm saying no repeatedly. So yes and no. Try that with me. Yes and no. Another one of my favorite signs is thank you because it allows me to express gratitude very readily. So to make that sign, what I want to do is start with a flat hand and I'm going to touch my chin and just bring it out about 6 to 8 inches from my chin. So thank you. Thank you. Now, this is very similar to another sign, which is fuck you. So keep that in mind and remember to thank your teammates and not tell your teammates to go fuck themselves. That's not the way to have a good team dynamic. The last sign that I really appreciate and use a lot is deaf applause. So to do that one, all we need to do is raise our hands parallel and shake them. And we can make that a round of applause, And this is a great way, again, to express gratitude at the end of a presentation or a guest speaker, or just to let someone know that you liked what they just did. Let's talk about breakout rooms. And I am well aware that breakout rooms are often basically just some kind of weird Zoom flavored purgatory to toss your students into and ignore them. So let me propose a structure to help make breakout rooms work for you and for your teams. And the key word here is structure. First off, it's incumbent upon the professor to provide you specific goals and specific direction to use your time in the breakout rooms. On top of that, I also like to actively check in with groups so that I can see how they're working and see if they're actually accomplishing their goals. Now, on the student side, you all can also use the ask for help button, and that's going to send me a pop up to ask me to come into your room. And that way, if you have a question, you can ask for help and get that question answered more or less immediately. So please do remember to use that button, it's extremely helpful. Also, I'd like to propose some structured group roles to help you make better use of your time in your breakout rooms. There are three standard roles that I like to assign, and those are session lead, parliamentarian, and the screen sharer. Your team should shift these roles regularly, especially the session lead. And there's a reason I call it the session lead, not the team lead. And that's because I really do think that you should be rotating that role regularly because this is a group of peers. No one is in charge of anyone else here. The most important role in my mind, though, is the parliamentarian. So let's start there. The parliamentarian has three major responsibilities. First, they keep track of the team, more or less as you might expect. Second, they keep the team on track. And finally, they keep the team together. Let's break those down a little more. Keeping the team on track is probably the obvious responsibility of any parliamentarian. You take notes in a shared document, initiate and record any votes your team might have use of, and send out reminders and calendar entries for upcoming meetings. The second responsibility is keeping the team on track. Now, I do not mean that you should immediately shut down rabbit trails. In fact, quite the opposite. We need that social connection right now, and in class is one of the ways to get that social connection. So instead of immediately shutting down rabbit trails, consider letting them run a bit. And when there's an obvious opening in the conversation, guide your team back to work. Finally, keeping the team together. So, the first responsibility of a good parliamentarian is to start every meeting with team check ins, just a quick ask of each team member to say something about their day and how they're feeling. And that'll help you connect with each other and work together better. That positivity bias, also very important for the parliamentarian. Don't forget that. Enthusiastic welcomings are great. Also, remind your teammates to be kind when they're being harsh. Those reminders can be really meaningful at times. Also, please pay attention to your teammates. Pay attention and see if any of them are withdrawing from the conversation and encourage contributions from them. Or if they're really withdrawing, maybe send them a direct message in the chat and check in and see how they're feeling. The session lead. The session lead, again, I'll define three primary responsibilities. Number one, define the goals for your team and for the work session. Number two, request contributions from your team members. And number three, create action items. Breaking that down, when you define your goals after the parliamentarians check in, you clearly state your team goals for that work session. And if you're not sure, ask for input from your teammates, collect that, and then restate those clearly so you're all on the same page with what you want to accomplish in your meeting. Then you need to break down that problem into achievable steps and discuss the quality and content of the work so that you can all produce work on a similar level. Second responsibility is requesting teammate contributions. And I do mean request. That's an important word there. You do not assign work to your team members and you do not demand work from your team members. They're your peers. What you should do instead is ask your team members if they can accomplish a certain task for the team. And finally, before you leave the meeting, create action items for your teammates, define the next steps, and give your teammates actionable items so that you can move your project forward when you're not all sitting in front of each other in a group meeting. The final important role is the screen sharer. Again, I'll break this down into three components. First off, you need a robust computer. Second, your main responsibility is synthesizing input from your team members. And finally, sharing your files. When I talk about a robust computer, what I mean first and foremost is a reliable internet connection. So if you have a good internet connection, the next step is locally installed software. Trust me, you do not want to try to use VDI Lab with Zoom. You're asking for heartbreak. It's just going to make a mess. And I've actually had my computer straight up crash when I tried that out. So locally install your software, if at all possible, when you're screen sharing it and using it alongside Zoom. Another big plus, and I know that not all of you have access to this, but if you have a teammate who does, it's a big benefit to have dual screens or a graphics card. So if you have a teammate with that kind of computing equipment, they're a great choice for screen sharing. Now, just having a nice computer is not really the point. The point is to synthesize input from your team members. You should always acknowledge input from all of your team members, even if you can't act on them immediately. Team members that aren't being acknowledged will eventually withdraw and stop contributing to the work. You take those inputs and quickly mock up solutions. And don't forget to take notes on the shortcuts you're taking so that you can clean this up later. And finally, make sure to share your files. Establish a team share drive where you can all contribute your files to the project, and clearly and consistently label your files so it's easy to find that information later. This was my presentation on virtual team building. I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope that my advice will help you build more robust and more dynamic teams to help you through this uniquely challenging semester. I wish you all the best of luck.